So there you are, like millions of others worldwide, sitting at your computer watching another AtariLeaf video, thinking to yourself, this is a fantastic machine, this Atari 2600. I should get one of those. But which model do I get? There are so many choices. What do I need to look out for? What do I need to be wary of? And what game should I start with? Well, not to worry, because AtariLeaf is here to help you on that buying decision in the AtariLeaf Guide to Buying an Atari 2600. We've all done it. We go to eBay, we type in Atari 2600, and hundreds of auctions come up. So many different models of the Atari, so many different games. Which model should I get? Which game should I get? How much should I expect to pay? Why is my battery dying? Oh wait, hold on. Stupid battery. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to know when you're thinking about buying an Atari 2600 is which model do I get? And there are several different models out there. This is the original Sunnyvale, California Heavy Sixer. Now, if you don't know, it's called the Heavy Sixer because it's heavier than the other models. It's physically heavier. And that's because of the internal RF shielding in there makes it heavier. You'll also know it's a Heavy Sixer by this molding around the front. It's a lot thicker than this other model here, which is a light sixer. So by holding both in your hands and by looking at this molding in particularly, see how it's much thinner than on the Heavy Sixer, you'll be able to tell which model you have. Now a Heavy Sixer just bare like this usually will run between $40 and $50. Sometimes you can get it cheaper, sometimes a little more. And again, it's going to depend on whether the package you're getting has any games, controllers, and so forth. I consider this personally to be the best model. It's my favorite. Also one made by Sears. That's a Sears Heavy Sixer. Those are probably the best made models and the ones I would recommend. But if you're a first-time starter and just want to get a machine just to play games, the light sixer will also do just fine. And a light sixer you can probably get for around $25 to $30, maybe less too. None of these machines are really a lot of money. Now some of the other models, and some that seem to be the most common to find, are these two. These are the 4-switch models. Now they still have the 6 switches that the original did. The difference is that the difficulty switches have been moved to the back. So there's your 4-grain wood switch and also the all black or the Vader unit, and these can usually be found for around $20. The last major version that was made came out in the late 80s is the junior model, and these personally I don't think are worth more than $10. I'm not a big fan of the juniors, but if you find one cheap, sure, pick it up. They work just fine for the most part. It's just the quality of the parts inside isn't quite as good. I'll also briefly mention the Gemini because some people run into these, but these are problematic. Now the Gemini was made by Coleco, but it used off-the-shelf parts, and it's not as good a quality machine as a genuine Atari. A couple of failure points to look for are the joystick ports, and again it's a soldering thing. The solder will get brittle and disconnect over time, and same with the power port. So if you get a Gemini, be very cautious because there's a good chance one of those two problems will exist on that machine, and unless you're good at soldering, you won't be able to use the machine, or it won't work great. Now the other option that I would recommend if you're thinking of getting your first Atari 2600 is to maybe go this route. This is the Atari 7800, and the 7800 is backwards compatible with the Atari 2600 games except for 2 or 3. I believe Robot Tank is one, Decathlon, Space Shuttle, some of the Activision games. And it will depend on which motherboard revision is inside the 7800. But there's a great library of Atari 7800 games. And they're upgraded versions of Miss Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Joust. Some of them are here. the ones that I have, and they're really good versions of these games. So that's another choice, is to go the Atari 7800 route. And again, an Atari 7800 you can usually get, depending on the market, between, I'd say, $30, maybe $50, depending. So now the next question is, where do you buy? Well, a lot of people, they'll turn first to eBay. I don't recommend that. I recommend eBay as a last resort. And the reason why is you want to be able to test the machine yourself. You don't want to spend the money on a machine and find out there's something wrong with it. A lot of people, when they say on eBay that something works, that means they turned it on, put a game in. If the screen came on, it works to them. You want to be able to thoroughly test your Atari. So I would recommend something like we're all familiar with, Craigslist or Kijiji. For example here, not a lot in my area. There's that supercharger sold. I actually bought that. Anyway, Kijiji. Put in a wanted ad on Kijiji. Put a wanted ad in on Craigslist looking for Atari 2600. And if you get a response, you'll want to be able to go over to the person's house and make sure you test it. Now here's the things I would say to look for when testing it. Okay. Here's an example. I'll just get this out. This is my Sears Heavy Sixer. Thank you, Thomas 3120. You have it hooked up. Say you have it hooked up in somebody's house. You have some games. And by the way, if the person is just selling the machine, doesn't have any games, and you happen to have some games, these are the ones I would recommend to bring. Bring Circus Atari, bring Missile Command, bring Space Invaders. And I'll mention the reasons why. Circus Atari, obviously, if you're buying a machine that has some paddles, you'll want to test the paddles. And the major thing with the paddles is jitter. So for example here, these are pretty much jitter-free paddles. They move pretty smoothly, if you can tell that. There. So these move fairly smoothly. There's a little jitter, but it's not too bad. So, and the buttons, you'll want to make sure the buttons work. The little guy jumps and so forth, so the buttons work on these. You'll want to check that out. The other thing you'll want to test is the switches on the machine itself. Look up at the top. You can see the games. You hit the game select switch, and you'll go through the different games. You'll want to make sure that works. The reset button, you want to make sure the reset button works. And now that we've tested the paddles, let's test the joystick too. And I'll go mention a few more switches too. So here we have Missile Command. And the reason I mentioned Missile Command is a great game to test out your joysticks to make sure they're working in all directions. Okay, so example here, you've got Missile Command, you're at somebody's house and you want to test out a joystick. For the sake of this video, I'm just using a Wyco stick, which I keep around for, because that's what I like to play. Hit reset, and here you watch your cursor, it moves all around. You press the fire button. Because if you play a game like, say, Space Invaders, where it just moves back and forth, you can't fully test the range of motion in the joystick. So there are other games, obviously, but Missile Command is one I use to test joysticks to make sure they're working properly, because you get a full range of motion on the screen. Another one that you could use instead of Circus Atari to test both paddles and the color and black and white switch, because not a lot of Atari games use the color and black and white switch, but Video Olympics does. So there's color, I don't know if you can tell, but now it's black and white, or grayscale. So to test that switch, if that's important to you, usually that one's not important, but I mean, if you want your Atari to work, you want all the switches to work. Okay, and finally, the last two switches that I'd like to test are the difficulty switches. And the reason I use Space Invaders is it becomes very obvious by looking at it whether that switch is working. Because in novice mode, your little cannon here is small, but when you put it on expert, see, your ship gets bigger. Expert, novice. Expert, novice. So that's a way to look at Atari 2600 and really thoroughly test it if you're buying one locally. That's the kind of thing you want to do. You don't want to just go to the person's house and they say, yes, it works. You give them the money, you go home and find out, oh crap, this switch doesn't work, this joystick port doesn't work. Make sure you thoroughly test it, and you'll avoid problems right from the get-go. So if you must use eBay, I don't really want to give a lesson on how to use eBay. Look for a seller who has a really good reputation. 100% is the best. Look for one that's got a very good description, uses a lot of pictures, someone that sells things like Atari on a regular basis. They're not just someone who picked up something at a yard sale and threw it on eBay trying to make some bucks. If you can't find anything locally, and again, before you go the eBay route, I would recommend this website. And many of you who subscribe to me also go here too, Atari Age. Go to Atari Age, go to the forums, and go to the marketplace. And again, come up here to this section, the wanted section, and post a wanted ad. Say, I'm looking for an Atari 2600. I guarantee you, you will find someone who will sell you an Atari. They will sell you an Atari that's in good working order, because these are collectors too. These aren't people just buying an Atari to sell it. These are collectors. They know their stuff. There are some very, very smart people, and there are some great sellers on Atari Age. I can't list them all because there are so many, but there are a lot of great sellers. If you have to buy online, try Atari Age before you go to eBay, if you can't get it locally. Now the last question that a lot of people are going to ask if they're first starting off, what game should I get? Well, there are so many. And to go through each and every game that you should get, it would be impossible. And again, it's personal preference. But some of the cheapest and easiest to find games are your best. And there's a reason for that. Those are the popular ones. Those were the ones everybody wanted. You can see some of them here. Any of the Activision games, most of them are really good. So you can't go wrong. Pitfall, for example, Spider Fighter, Stampede, Chopper Command. There are so many. And most of the games, if you buy the really common ones, you can get a good 20, 30, 40, 50 of them, and a lot perhaps. Those you can buy on eBay. You're pretty safe. And you can get them dirt cheap. They will cost pennies each. If you just buy loose games. If you're looking for boxes, then it's going to probably cost you a little more. And of course, check out your local yard sales, your thrift stores, your flea markets, your pawn shops. You might get lucky. And again, a pawn shop will usually let you test a machine. There will be a good variety of games, usually some good prices. It depends on the thrift store, of course. So, I'm not going to recommend any games. I have a video that shows my top 10, if you want to check that out. But there are many great, cheap games for the Atari 2600. You will have no problem finding a quick and dirty library of great games for your system. So there you go. A quick little buyer's guide, what you should pay, what you should look for, how you should test a machine before you buy it. A little buyer's guide just to help you out if you're starting out in the Atari 2600 for the first time. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it helps out, and enjoy your Atari 2600. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.